Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Carol Henderson, Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion, Chief Diversity Officer, and Advisor to the President at Emory University. It's a pleasure to welcome you and our distinguished guest, Reverend Dr. Greg Ellison II, to a conversation about Juneteenth that we've titled Juneteenth, the Long Arc of Justice. Emory University, for the first time in its history, will observe Juneteenth tomorrow. And so what we've realized is that many people don't know about that holiday, its significance. We celebrate distinguished luminaries in our country who owned slaves, but we don't acknowledge the one holiday that speaks to the freedom of those who were held captive on our American soil. And so tomorrow will be that observation, but we also want to take it from its historical import to look at what that means for us in this current moment and how we can make that holiday live and become foundational to the work we need to do as a society, but also as human beings in our own reflection. So that's going to be the first question that I'll ask our Reverend Dr. Greg Ellison II, and I'm going to call him Reverend Dr. Greg during this conversation because I want to acknowledge all the work that went into him becoming Reverend Dr. Greg Ellison II. So good morning, Reverend Dr. Greg. I appreciate you. I appreciate you, and you know that. So let's start with the first question. I'll let everyone know our conversation will be about 30 minutes. We're going to try to keep it to that. I know there are a lot of webinars. They're an hour, hour and a half. We just want to reflect, meditate on this, and give you something short and compact to discuss. So I hope you will take it in that spirit. So our first question, and this is a conversation, even though I wanted to make it an interview, he switched so we're going to make it a conversation. He's going to ask questions of me and I will ask him of him. So can you think about our title and what it means to you, kind of Juneteenth, the long arc of justice?
Yeah. Thanks again, Doc, for welcoming me into this space and giving me some time to not only reflect on this very unique point in our history as a nation, but our role as members of this community at Emory in that history. I'll be honest, tomorrow will be the first day that I've ever observed Juneteenth. I have, however, observed watch night services, which in many African-American churches is a symbol, a symbolic remembering of the day of emancipation and the night on before January 1st, where we, many of us tarry in prayer, looking forward to the day ahead and the new year ahead. This goes back to the day of emancipation on December 31st of 1862, when slaves gathered knowing that emancipation would come on January 1st of 1863. And so there was an anticipatory moment, looking forward to imagining about reunifying families that could happen once emancipation was written into law. Juneteenth, however, really is a reflection of how some ways our policies don't work expediently.
Yes. How about that?
While it was written into law that the slaves were to be emancipated on January 1st of 1863, the folks in Texas did not get word of that until 2 years later, almost
Yes.
2.5 years later.
Yes.
And so Juneteenth has become symbolic of that pregnant moment
Mm-hmm.
between the reality of it written on paper and then the time in which the slaves were actually given some semblance of freedom. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say some semblance because the gates were not truly opened
Right.
in 1863 or 1865, or as we see now in 2020.
Indeed.
Let me say a little bit about that subtitle. You know, Dr. Henderson, you have shared with me that we just need to be ourselves and
Authentic.
we have conversations all of the time.
Yes, we do.
This has been a very difficult week for me. The
Mm-hmm.
past 7 days have been challenging. As I shared with you, I mentored young men in Peoplestown, which is in the University Avenue neighborhood where the shooting took place on last
Yes.
Friday here in our beloved city.
Yes.
And that community is a food desert.
Mm.
And so the only restaurant that you could really eat at in that area is that Wendy's.
Wow.
And so I have eaten in the Wendy's where the shooting took place. For that reason, I have been unable to look at the video.
Mm-hmm.
Not only have I eaten in that Wendy's because of the kind of heavy drug trafficking in that area, there are police frequent that Wendy's.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've sat in the parking lot with police and young men that I am mentoring who are trying to make themselves more whole.
Mm-hmm.
And so to think about the tragedy,
Yeah.
the trauma
Yes.
of a man being shot in the back after George Floyd, after Breonna Taylor, after Ahmaud Arbery, after Emmett Till,
Mm-hmm.
after the many thousands gone who have
Mm-hmm.
been unnamed.
Mm-hmm.
I've not been in a good place this week.
Mm-hmm.
And then on yesterday morning, around 5:30 a.m., my 11-year-old daughter came into the bedroom with my wife and I. And for the first time in several years, asked could she sleep with us
Uh-huh.
because she had a nightmare that I had been pulled out of the car in a parking lot
Wow.
and held at gunpoint by police.
Wow.
The long arc of justice
Mm.
challenges us to engage in a process of long-term liberation.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
was talking to a white friend of mine just this week,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, Greg, what do we need to do? How can we help? And I told him, be patient and be ready for the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yeah, but we want things to change immediately.
Yes.
And I said to him, my brother, this is at least 400 years in the making.
Indeed.
And the work that we have to do must be sustained for the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, that's kind of depressing. How can we keep up the energy for that long? And I'll end my opening with this, Doc. I shared
Mm-hmm.
with him a story about my grandfather.
I love this story.
And my grandfather was a sharecropper in Mississippi. And his father was a sharecropper in Mississippi, and his grandfather was a slave. That's how close the generations are.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 1920s, my grandfather was in a field, and he decided as a teenager that none of my kids would ever pick cotton. As a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
all his people knew was cotton. And he decided none of my kids will ever pick a piece of cotton, and they will all go to college. He had never met a Black person who had been to college in the 1920s in rural Mississippi. But he made that declaration as a teenager in a cotton field. None of his kids, he had 12 of them, pick cotton. Mm. All of his kids went to college. Mm-hmm. And it was because of a dream that was born in a cotton field under the hot, sticky Mississippi sun that I am sitting here talking to you today. I am the manifestation.
Yes, you are.
Not only of answered prayers, but long hours of back-breaking labor. Mm-hmm. And someone who could dream a dream so big that he could not even fathom. Mm-hmm. That is the long arc of justice. And that is the kind of vision that I am inviting our allies and friends to join us on, to dream of a world that our great-great-grandchildren will inhabit that is better than the one where we see people shot in the back in a Wendy's.
Yes.
Pulled in the middle of the street and kneeled on for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, hung on a tree. We have come a long way, but we still got a long way to go. And that is why we are inviting folks not only to remember Juneteenth, but to think about this as a pregnant moment.
Yes.
Where we begin to dream bold dreams.
All right.
And work towards them at a very measured, thoughtful, in a measured and thoughtful process. I got a question for you, Doc. I didn't know that.
Well, I mean, I love that because you talk, if I can add to that, how intentional our work must be.
Yes, indeed.
And that it has to be foundational. And I think one of the other things you brought up was people have been asking Black folks, how can we help you?
Yes, indeed.
And I appreciate the question, but it has to start with reflection. It has to start with self-reflection, because I can't have you. I think I heard Stephen Furtick, and I mentioned this somewhere else. He's a minister, Elevation Church. He said, we have to sit down and understand before we can stand up for justice. Yeah. And I can understand that because oftentimes we want to engage without having done the self-work. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping Juneteenth will give people time to think about what Brian Stevenson said in our commencement, was that slavery never ended, it just evolved. And so how do those roots still have tentacles in our policies and our practices? And how do we pull those up? What do we do with that? So that's what I'm hearing. That's what I see.
So what does that phrase, the long arc of justice, mean to you?
Oh my goodness. It is, well, I think you said it a lot more eloquently than I have. And I think it's a phrase that people use. They quote Martin Luther King Jr. on it because he has talked about the long arc of justice having a moral bend that and I haven't heard that word used a lot, the morality of what we're talking about and how it's connected to the humanity of people.
Yes, indeed.
And I was reading somewhere, Michael Denzel Smith has this wonderful book, and I want to get the title right, Invisible Man Got the Whole World Watching, a young Black man's education.
Yes.
Where he wrote an op-ed piece a couple of years ago, because Obama so loved this term, that whole phrase, the moral arc of justice, the moral arc will bend towards justice at some point, to the point that Obama had it woven into a rug in the Oval Office. I wonder where that rug is now, and I'm going to behave. I will behave. I'm not going to go there.
Yeah, our friends are watching on all.
That's right. I'm going to behave. I wonder where the rug is. I hope Obama took it with him. But that we need to, I think the more arc of justice for me is what former Attorney General Eric Holder says. The arc of justice will bend, but people have to bend it towards justice. And that's what we're seeing at this moment. We have to be active in our own liberation. We have to be active in the ways in which we begin to talk about and develop policy and change systemic structures. We have to bend that arc. We have to do it. We have to have hard conversations. We have to challenge each other. We have to look at the infrastructure and bend it or dismantle it or engage it in ways that will move our country towards realizing what we say, which is we hold these truths to be self-evident.
Yeah.
That all of us were created equal. We know that the founding documents of this country, many of us are looking at them as if they're static, but they should be living documents. And if they are, that's why I can say all people are created equal, even though the document said men. All people are created equal, endowed by their creator, not by man, but endowed by their creator with these unalienable rights, among them, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think we're at a moment where we're trying to bend that document, which has Black people as 3/5 beings, not whole beings.
Writing.
Yes. So we're trying to bend that towards our arc of justice. So Juneteenth, when I think of that emancipatory moment, that freed the body, but we still have some captivity we have to deal with when it comes to mind, spirit, acknowledging as a country the moral sin of slavery. We don't call it what it is. It was horrible. When I used to teach it, I would tell my students, there's no way to teach slavery as if it was a walk in the park. It was horrific. And you have to acknowledge that pain in order for us to move that arc so that we can start having salient conversations about change. So that said, because we could talk all day, that's a whole meeting by itself. My third I think I did the second one, so you're going to do the other one. What does freedom, is that mine or yours?
No, you can ask that.
Yeah,
I'll answer that one.
Yeah, what does freedom and what does liberation mean? I really, those are some very, when you talk about pregnant words, what do they mean when we think of Juneteenth, when we think of the arc of justice? What is that? What's the tension there?
Yeah. So I've thought a lot about this question. This is not an easy question.
No, it's not.
And to differentiate freedom and liberation. So I not only did a little reading last night, I called on my community of friends, and one of our doctoral students, Nick Peterson, and a dear friend and former student, Marissa Penderman, chimed in, and some other friends like my brother Toby have helped me to put a finger on this. I from those readings and conversations with friends, I think of freedom. In the dictionary, it says it's a state of being. But I think of freedom as a birthright.
All right.
It's something that we are intrinsically given, that we enter this world with. However, and this is a big however, at the point of conception, even though freedom is a birthright, some of us are deprived of freedoms. And my sister is a maternal care activist. She's not just a nurse, she's a maternal care activist. And so I called her and asked her about some infant mortality rates, and she pulled a CDC study that says Black babies that are born to Black women, the infant mortality rate, 11 out of every 1,000 Black babies die.
Wow. Wow.
Within the first day. This is a CDC study. And that's more than twice the rate of white, Asian, or Hispanic children. The same can be said. Black mothers die at a rate of 3.2 times higher than white mothers. And so while freedom is a birthright, Black children, because of systemic inequities around health disparities, are fighting from the moment they take their first breath. And so why might this be? I went to my high school reunion my 20-year reunion a few years back, and it was striking to me to find that my colleagues looked so much older. And I went to an all-Black high school. It's a great school, but some of my colleagues didn't do so well. And poverty takes a toll on people's life. If you have to work an hourly wage, you may not get health benefits. And if you don't get health benefits, you're only going to urgent care and to the emergency room, and you're not caring for your body. If you're not making a certain wage, you're not able to afford healthy food. If you're not in a salaried position, you probably can't take a vacation. All of these elements take a toll on the body. And so when children are born into systems like that, where they're not receiving health care, their freedoms are being impinged upon at the point of conception.
Wow.
And so liberation is what challenges us to fight for freedom, to fight for the birthright, to fight for the life. And that's what Black Lives Matter is. We're fighting to be seen and heard and valued as human beings.
Yes.
And
the question is, why should we have to?
Why should we have to? And this is why Juneteenth is important.
Yes.
Because this fight has been happening for hundreds of years.
Yes.
And so we have to continue in this fight, knowing statistics like the one I just read, but there are glimpses of freedom. And that's why I think freedom is not just a birthright. Freedom is a part of our, it's a deep part of our imagination and hope. And so I think there are pockets of freedom.
Yeah.
When you see a child laugh.
Yeah.
When you see a bird, as Nina Simone would say, as I see a bird flying, I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. So I look at the birds, when you are in a pool and you're swimming and you feel like you are defying gravity. I mean, those kinds of elements give us the sustenance, the energy, the vitality, the endurance for liberation.
Yes.
And so for me, watching young people feel the streets gives me some energy to keep forward, fighting towards liberation. And last thing, Doc, I think some folks may believe, well, I'm not an activist. I'm not going to the front lines of a rally. And so the work that I'm doing doesn't matter. And I'll invoke my father here, and I know we're almost at time. My father passed, and the women in my life, I write about them. It's not just, I'm not just only about the men in my life, but I'm talking about my father. And in this moment, my father was an accountant here in Atlanta, and he and my mother moved to Atlanta to participate in the civil rights movement. And my father very rarely went to rallies and marches, but his role was as an accountant, to keep the books clean, to ensure that the iconic civil rights leaders that we read about in history, the college presidents over in the AUC, even some of our mayors, he kept their books to ensure that they would not go to jail. And so you may be wondering, well, I'm not an activist. I won't go out and, be in the midst of a rally. Well, King talks about the long arc of justice and even garbage men and women
Mm-hmm.
doing their work with dignity and seeing that part of the struggle.
Right.
And so how do you show up each and every day in your classroom? How do you show up each and every day as an administrator? How do you show
Mm-hmm.
up each and every day as a student, recognizing that the work that you're doing today will impact those who come beyond you? So when you write a paragraph, know that you're not just writing for a grade, you're writing to free somebody.
Mm. Yeah, that's a responsibility. That's a huge responsibility. One that, so I'm going to continue our conversation because I know we have a few minutes because I want to talk about your work.
Yeah.
And I love the title. You have two books, and everyone should know what those are. We had it on our advertisement that we sent out, but I really want to talk about Fearless Dialogues.
Uh-huh.
And I love your title, Fearless Dialogues, a new movement for justice, really. Can you explain how we can use key concepts in that work for our current moment?
Yeah. I'm so grateful to have received a lot of energy and support to birth this work.
Uh-huh.
Here at Emory, the first Fearless Dialogues conversation we had was in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
I got on NPR. It was just days after the Zimmerman verdict was announced. And
Wow.
that following Saturday, Doc, you remember that moment in history, people were marching to their state capitals with their sweet tea and their Skittles. And
Yes.
and I got on NPR and I said, if you are going to march, please do.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not going to march, come join us at Emory for a conversation. And the challenge there was I did not talk to my dean first, but she supported that endeavor, and 400 people showed up.
Wow.
And,
Amazing.
and so we had a hard conversation about how do we care for the young people in our community. And that
Yeah.
was the birth of what has become an organization that's now worked with over 40,000 people worldwide.
Amazing.
And so what we seek to do is to create these spaces, these unique spaces using
Mm-hmm.
theory and these very engaging experiments. You participated in it, Dr.
Yes,
Henderson,
it's amazing.
that invite unlikely partners, people who don't normally talk, into heartfelt conversations about taboo subjects.
Mm-hmm.
And so the work that we do is built on 3 pillars. And I think it's really important, given this space and time that we find ourselves in. And we've been gaining a lot of traction, not only in schools like Emory, but in the corporate sector and working with large ecclesial bodies. And it's built on these 3 pillars. The first is see, the second is hear, and the third is change. See, hear, change.
Mm-hmm.
And our philosophy is that if you cannot first see an individual as a person of worth, to see that person in your community, regardless of their rank or title, as a person of worth,
Mm-hmm.
it is not possible to hear anything that they say
Agreed.
as valuable
Mm-hmm.
and meaningful to the life of the community.
Mm-hmm.
However, far too many schools, corporations, churches, synagogues, they move to the change moment to begin creating solutions
Mm-hmm.
in a reactionary way,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
without first seeing the people around them and hearing the diverse stories. Therefore, without that communal ownership of seeing and hearing people, we believe and have found in our research that any change that is created will not be sustainable. And so in this moment, people are rushing to say, what can we do?
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important question. But it's equally important to ask, who can we be?
Mm-hmm.
And who must we see?
Yeah.
And who must be heard?
Right.
So that as we begin to form policies, that inform institutions like universities.
Right.
The policies are not just coming from the top down.
Right.
Because
Right.
when the policies come from top down, the people who are on the ground can scapegoat and say, it's not working because I had nothing to do with it. But when we see and hear people initially, then we can begin to form bonds that build in ownership.
Mm-hmm.
So that change is a collective process. And that's the other thing that I think liberation is communal.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Liberation is not something that one person can bring about.
That's
And
right.
so I think we are, there's a misconception that when we change from the top down, everything can happen. There needs to be a groundswell in which the people who are seen as at the top of the chain are in direct communication with the people who are perceived to be at the bottom of the chain.
Yes.
And I think that makes sustainable change more realistic. But the question is, how do we have those conversations?
And I think you offer that. I mean, we have to be fearless in those dialogues. I take that to heart. I participated in your, and for me it was an experience, not a workshop. It was an experience because you have to be vulnerable, transparent in that moment in order to move. And so I think to see someone, you have to examine why you didn't see them in the first place.
That's right.
And what are the filters you're using to look at other people or look through other people? Because sometimes we can look past people and not see them.
Yeah.
And hearing is an active activity.
It is.
You can't talk and hear at the same time. At least I'm not gifted that way. Hearing, I'm not. I mean, I have to form ideas. So if I'm talking, that means I've shut off my mechanism to receive what you have to tell me. And we're going to have to do that at Emory. I mean, for our past, present, and future, where I see us going as an institution as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, we have to have fearless dialogues about Emory's past.
Yes.
What we did and did not do, real conversation, where we are with our present, whether it's uncomfortable or not, in order to map our future. And we have to have the entire campus community on board. As you mentioned, every liberation movement I've seen has had to come from the grassroots level. It is a joining of that, and we should not be in a position where we need to lean in. Folks have to lean in so far that they have to tip over to get your attention. That's not how we lean in. Means I need to hear you. That's the hearing part. We talk about leaning into something, but leaning in means if I didn't hear you where my position is, I need to lean to where you are so I can understand your point of view and change. So I know we're a few minutes over, so I want the Reverend Doctor. First of all, let me say thank you. This has been amazing. I so appreciate you, the work you do on our campus. I want you to know I see you. I hear you. I appreciate the gift you are to the Emory community and really to Atlanta and worldwide. I mean, that's what happens when a grandfather and great-grandfather think up a dream, imagine their progeny being at an institution like Emory, but we won't forget where you did your education.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Was it Harvard and Princeton?
No, I went to Emory as an
Yes, was one
undergrad
of them.
and then to Princeton Seminary.
That's right. I knew it was one of those.
Yes,
And so that is you talk about cultivating in, as my grandmother would say, tall, you in that field where the grass is tall.
Cotton.
That's right. That's what it is. That's where it is. So I will end with this. What nuggets of wisdom would you leave with those who are listening, who are trying to find direction, or as I stated in another forum, to find that one thing? There's something. Everybody can't do everything, but everybody can do something. And so in that process of finding your something, what nuggets of wisdom would you leave with our guests who have tuned in to us today. And I appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in.
So I'll call forth the wisdom of two giants in American history. The first is Angela Davis.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
Angela Davis came to campus shortly before you arrived, Dr. Henderson.
She's amazing. I saw her at the University of Delaware. We had her there. She always draws, just phenomenal.
She's amazing. And
Yes.
in the Q&A section of her conversation at Glenn Memorial, she said, you know, I dream of a world where there are no prisons.
Amazing.
And I work toward that world. And she said, and it sounds crazy to some people, but I want you to know that there was some people in the 1600s who were dreaming of a world with no slavery, which is hard to imagine if you had been entrenched in a world where slavery had been around you for 200 years.
Yes, yes.
How can you dream of a world without that, if that's all you have ever known and all your people have ever known? And so I dream of a world where my grandchildren can run through neighborhoods.
Well,
I'm not gonna go there, but
look, go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to follow that with Benjamin Mays's thoughts. Benjamin Mays wrote the most important book I own in my library. It's called Disturbed About Man. It's a collection of his speeches. Benjamin Mays was Dr. King's teacher, the president of Morehouse College.
Yes.
And also a good friend and ally of Howard Washington Thurman. And in this speech called The Unattainable Goal, he has these words that I would share with you as a word of challenge, my friends. Hear these words from Benjamin Mays. It must be borne in mind that the tragedy in life doesn't lie in not reaching your goal. The tragedy lies in having no goal to reach. It isn't a calamity to die with dreams unfulfilled, but it is a calamity not to dream. It is not a disaster to be unable to capture your ideal, but it is a disaster to have no ideal to capture. It is not a disgrace not to reach the stars, but it is a disgrace to have no stars to reach for. Not failure, but low aim is sin. Not failure, but low aim is sin. So our dear friend Dr. Mays is inviting us to dream bold dreams. Yes. To imagine a world just like Angela Davis has invited us to imagine, one where our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids can live in a place where they don't feel threatened to leave their home. Yes. They feel like they can have a child, and that child will, from that moment's first breath, can have the freedom that they desire. That's my nugget of wisdom. I love it. I love you. I'm glad.
Love you back. Love you back. I am so. We have had a fabulous meditation.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, and you have given, and our conversation has cultivated more a dialogue where we will have more conversation about what it means to be conscious and present at this very moment, because we have to have both of those. We have to be conscious and present in order to see, hear, change. Yes, I got those. See, hear, change. Thank you so much, everyone, for allowing us to come together and think on these things. We hope that you will take this conversation, meditate on it, and think about ways to enact change in your space. I want to thank again the Reverend Dr. Gregory Ellison II, who is the manifestation of a bold dream.
Yes.
You have done the ancestors proud. I want to thank the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. I want to thank the Office of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion for putting this together. We bid you well, be safe, and go out and change the world. Thank you.
Peace for the journey.
Peace for that journey.